starting off with a new topic of Newton's laws of motion. Okay. So you would be most often seeing the short form of this being used. It's not an official short form, but you would be seeing this across textbooks so that we can refer to it. So whenever you see NLM as a reference to the syllabus, you would be considering it as Newton's laws of motion. So we'd be doing this almost in 2 weeks without friction, right? So this week and the next week, all the contact force problems that we are going to solve will not involve any friction. So at the start today, we'll be trying to introduce terms and terminologies that we would be encountering in this topic so that our language is smooth while we are communicating with each other. Okay, so I'm not going to assume that you have done this topic before. I know there will be introductions of this particular topic right from your 8th or 9th standard, but we will be trying to do it in a very formal manner. Okay, so first important term, just like in the last week's syllabus, we had a term called kinematics, right? So this particular topic would be coming under the term dynamics. Okay, so that's our first term that we are going to look at. So this is nothing but a study of cause of motion, whereas in kinematics we looked at it as the study of effect of motion. So what is a fundamental question that you will always ask as a physicist in the topic of dynamics? So fundamental question in classical mechanics is, when we are given the position vector, velocity vector, and all interactions of a particular system or a body from its surroundings, can we find the position of that particular body at a later instant or not? So this is our fundamental question in any of the dynamics problem. Okay, so just let me formally write it. So the fundamental question in Newtonian mechanics is also known as classical mechanics, another important word, right? An alternative to this in modern physics is quantum mechanics. So all the theories that we are going to develop during this week and use it for the rest of our syllabus would come under Newtonian mechanics, which is also known as classical mechanics, right? So if we are given if we are, let's say, presented with position vector, initial one, velocity vector, initial one, and main importantly, all interactions of the body, all interactions of a body with its surroundings, with its surroundings. So the question arises, can we find position vector of the body, position vector of the body at any later instant t? Okay, right? So this could be termed as one of the equations of motion of the body. So using the interaction forces and the initial conditions of that particular system, can you actually find out what is the later equation of motion? So that's the idea, and the answer is yes, we can, once we know all of that. So the question we have asked and answer is also there during this topic. So that's how we start this particular topic. Second important thing, the cause of motion, whatever we are doing, is studied under the branch of dynamics. The cause of motion, whatever the cause that we are looking at, right, is studied under the branch dynamics. using Newton's laws of motion. NLM, I'm using the short form. So that's why the branch of classical mechanics, because it uses Newton's laws of motion, is also called, what's the name I told you already? Newtonian mechanics. So this is our basic introduction to this particular topic. Okay. Now, any topic that we started off, for example, in kinematics, we started off with some physical quantities. Any chapter of physics, we require physical quantities to quantitatively arrive at some conclusions in that particular topic. Okay, most of those situations are involved in experimental results, and experimental results are always expressed in physical quantities. So let's see what are the physical quantities that are involved in this chapter. Important physical quantities. So the first one is mass. The second important one is acceleration, which we already encountered in kinematics anyways. The third one is momentum. The fourth one is the force. So these are the basic things. We'll also start encountering the spin-offs of these things, the derived quantities out of these things also later. You should be able to acknowledge that the first one is the only scalar among these four, and rest of all are vectors. Now, out of these four, one of the most important things, all are important, but one of the most important things that you should be able to notice is the term force. Okay, so we'll continue with that discussion. Force is required to be studied in dynamics. Okay, so why do you think it is required to be studied? To understand few things. So let's see what are those. First is how a body can accelerate. You can only answer this question unless, right, you study a force. How a body can move in a curvilinear path. You'll also see bodies moving in curvilinear paths, and you cannot explain that curvilinear motion unless you understand what force is acting on it. So that's our second reason why we study force. Curvilinear motion needs to be explained, then we require the understanding of force. And the last one, why a rocket rising up with a constant velocity against gravity needs to lose mass. So this is the variable mass system. So why a rocket rising up with a constant velocity against gravity keeps needing to lose mass. Otherwise it cannot move up, right? So in all these three different cases, you need to understand the forces acting on that particular body, and we have to be able to write equations with respect to the force that we understood. Okay, so these are the physical quantities. Next, any topic will always fall under certain basic assumptions, because reality is very harsh, and if you include all the realistic conditions, you can't write equations. So equations are always written under some ideal assumptions. Just like, I think if you remember the projectile motion, all our equations were under the basic assumption that most of the times we didn't take the air resistance into account. Okay, so similarly, let's see some basic assumptions under which we are going to develop the equations in this particular topic. Okay, so that's our next agenda. Basic assumptions of Newtonian mechanics. Why are these important? Because in future, as you grow up, you will study higher branches of physics. So you should also know when not to apply whatever we are studying this particular week. Under what assumptions only the laws that we are going to develop are valid, you should also know when not to apply. Okay, so that's the reason why we are starting it off with this. Okay, so let me discuss and also write one by one with you. First important thing, during this topic, all the velocities involved are insignificant compared to velocity of light. That's a very important assumption under which the Newtonian mechanics will work. So all velocities involved are supposed to be insignificant when compared to the standard symbol we use for velocity of light. You all should be knowing it by now, small c. Okay, right? That is in mathematical terms, this v square divided by c square term keeps appearing in higher level physics known as quantum physics, and this should be always less than 1 in this chapter. If it is not obeying this kind of a relation, then whatever we are going to develop next pages will not be valid. So this is a very, very important thing. So if a body is traveling at 20 meter per second, yes, this rule is applicable. But if a spaceship is moving at c/2 velocity, then Newtonian mechanics will fail to explain its laws of motion. So that's where your Newtonian or in classical mechanics will fail. Okay, so that's the idea. Second one, mass of a closed system is constant. Mass of a closed system. Okay, I'll explain what is this closed system. I'm using it because you people have already got used to these words from your thermodynamics in 10th grade. So I'm taking that, but we'll also formally introduce those definitions later. Don't worry about it right now. You just take it down as a constant and frame. This is very important. So let me illustrate that in a different color. That frame independent. So we're talking about mass being frame independent. In future, caution. In future, you realize something called as relativistic mass. That means mass will be relative to a frame of observer and it would change. And it takes into account the first point itself. Actually, in future, you will write mass in any frame would be equal to the rest mass divided by this term that I'm talking about. Okay, so this should not be applied in classical mechanics. So this is in your relativistic mechanics. And you could see why this will be okay in this chapter. You could see v square by c square in most of our conditions would be very small. So you would be saying irrespective of which frame you are moving, mass is always a constant. Okay, so that's the second assumption we have taken. Let's move to the third one. Bodies are rigid until unless otherwise specified. So they'll say a bus is traveling along a road and you want to apply Newton's laws of motion, you'd assume it to be a rigid body. Until unless they say something about elasticity and all that, we'll consider rigid body. Unless until specified. I'll give you a simple example of that. Imagine I'm given a pulley mass system like this in any problem. I'm drawing a pulley. Then there is a thread which goes around it. Okay, right, and there are blocks attached to it on either side. This is a nice Atwood machine that you will study later also. So just giving an example. So imagine this is M1 and this is M2. So in this particular problem, and nothing is mentioned, let's suppose we are free to assume that M1 and M2 belong to a rigid body systems. But you could see M1 plus thread plus M2. This is not a rigid body. You could see its shape is changing. Okay, so whatever Newton's laws of motion equation that we are going to derive, your F equal to ma and all that stuff. So if I consider this as the first systems and this as second systems, okay, NLM equation that we are going to derive when applied to the second system will not provide acceleration of M1 or M2 or thread individually, but provide, we'll realize this in a future chapter, acceleration of center of mass of system. So if you want acceleration of only one body, that body that you are applying the equation, like if I apply it only for M1, then you can define acceleration of only M1 because every point on that M1 would be moving with same acceleration. But if you consider this entire thing as a system, then different points on that particular body would be moving with different acceleration, and even the shape is actually changing. So that's not a rigid system. Okay, so that's very, very important when you are trying to apply. So then you will introduce a concept called as center of mass of the system in the future. So during this topic, we're not going to do that. Fourth important point, let's move to the next page. Rigid body in pure translation can be considered as point mass to calculate its velocity and acceleration. So rigid body in pure translation can be considered as a point mass for calculating its velocity and acceleration. So this is quite obvious. So if a bus is considered to be rigid body, which is actually a big one, different points on the body are there, and pure translation refers to each and every point of that bus will be moving with the same velocity and acceleration. So you can replace that bus in your assumptions or equations as a single point mass to calculate its velocity and acceleration. So that's another important thing that we are going to do. Fifth important point during Newton's laws of motion, rotation of a point mass is not considered. Whenever you talk about a point, this is very important, points don't rotate. Particles is a different word. A particle is always having a size, right? But point mass, which is a point and mathematically a point occupies only a single dot in space, it's not supposed to rotate. Is not considered. So that's one of the basic things in Newton's laws of motion. Okay, so in future chapter of center of mass is a point. So you don't say center of mass is rotating. Entire body you will say is rotating around center of mass, but center of mass, which is a point, won't rotate. Okay, so that's a very important point that we need to understand. Okay, right. So with these basic assumptions, we'll move ahead to the next page. We need to study, you all know, 3 Newton's laws of motion to understand Newtonian mechanics. So this is a very formal way of introducing ourselves to the topic. Okay, right. So let's start with the first law. Okay. Before just writing out that first law, you should understand how Newton formulated his first law. What are the things that motivated him to do that? Actually, he borrowed it from one of the initial considerations of Aristotle and Galileo. Aristotle actually gave a law in terms of motion, but made a mistake of considering force and velocity to be proportional to each other. Okay, so and Galileo introduced the concept of inertia. So he combined the mistaken philosophy of Aristotle and the idea of inertia of Galileo, and then formulated his first law of motion. So inertia actually is associated with the first law of motion, but it was first formulated by Galileo. Okay, so here, because he uses the concept of inertia in this law, it's also known as law of inertia. So this is an important question that they will usually ask in theory. So which of the three laws of in Newton's laws of motion is called a law of inertia? It's the first law because it introduces and undertakes the concept of inertia very seriously. So that's what we're going to write in the second point. It defines the concept of inertia, and that inertia concept has three main forms. Okay, it defines the concept of inertia, which has three main forms. Okay, and as we move along, you realize the concept of inertia itself defines the physical quantity mass. Okay, so we'll just make a note here itself instead of writing a separate sentence for that. So what are those three main forms of inertia we are talking about? So within the same point, we'll write the first form of inertia is called inertia of rest. Okay, so for those for whom English is not their native language, you should realize that word inertia itself is not an English word. Okay, right? So let's try to understand that right now. Now it is incorporated. So if you open an English dictionary and see the meaning of the word inertia, inertia is associated with the word laziness. Okay, so this is means laziness. Okay, right. So this is the dictionary meaning of it. So inertia of rest, you can think of it as the laziness of trying to be at rest, something of that sort. Okay, so system or body starting from rest is an example for inertia of rest. Example, a system or a body starting from rest is an example of a state of inertia of rest. Okay, so right now I'm sitting in my chair. So in order to get up from that state of rest, I would require some force, right? So until unless I am getting motivated by that force, I would tend to continue to stay at rest in my seat. And that concept is called inertia of rest concept. Okay, so second one is inertia of motion. Okay, right. A comet is supposed to continuously move across space in system, and it will not stop until unless it is obstructed by some rubble or some planet or some star, right? So if something is moving in indefinitely, in order to stop it, again you require a force. So just like inertia of rest, inertia of motion also continues as a laziness. So you may not associate laziness in real life to motion, but in the concept of dynamics, anything that is happening continues to happen is what he wants to say. So if it's at rest, it will try to stay at rest. If it's in motion, it will try to continue its motion. So this is the idea of inertia that he introduced. Okay, so I'll just give you a shorter example instead of a comet or something. A system inside a bus coming to rest. A system inside a bus coming to rest. So bus is coming to rest, but the person who is sitting inside is in state of motion. So he will continue to be in that state of motion even though the bus is coming to rest. And that is what explains why if you're sitting inside a bus and bus is suddenly stopped, but your body wants to stay in that state of motion, that's why your body moves forward. So if someone wants you to explain why a person in the bus falls forward when the bus suddenly stops, you would use the phrase inertia of motion. Okay, he was in motion, so he tries to continue to stay in that inertia of motion, and that's why the body comes forward. That's the explanation from first law of motion you will try to explain. Last one, inertia of direction. Right, I think the same bus example now you would already give it to me. If bus is taking a turn, right? So imagine you are going straight, okay? And that means your body, bus, everything was going straight, and suddenly bus takes a turn. Your body refuses to take that turn. Okay, right? So your body tries to continue to move straight, whereas bus is, let's say, taking a left turn. Just imagine. So with respect to the bus, you might think that you are actually falling to the opposite direction, but it is not. Actually, your body is trying to move in the same direction as it was moving before, and the bus is actually taking the left turn, and then you get that feeling that you are going towards right. You are not going towards right. You are trying to continue your state of motion. So this direction difference is stated as the inertia of direction. Okay, so laziness to continue to stay in one particular direction is called inertia of direction. Okay. So a system in a bus which is taking a turn, which is taking a turn. Right. So this particular 2 points we have covered, and you should also realize that these laws, whatever law, the first law and second law and third law that we are going to replicate, these laws work in inertial frame only. So what is inertial frame? He defined another frame in which these laws will work. So he first defined the concept of inertia. Can you see at the top? And then he's now going to define a frame or a particular observation frame, which he terms as inertial frame, in which these laws will work. So if you're not in that inertial frame, his laws will fail. That's what he said. Okay, so we need to understand what is meant by inertial frame, and also under what states or what frames the laws won't work. So this is our next agenda. And before that, we'll write the statement, formal statement of Newton's first law. So statement of first law. There are many forms. Okay, so I'll give you my form. I generally write it in a very simple manner. A force is required to change the state of inertia of a body. Okay, so that's my way of interpreting the Newton's first law. After introducing you to the terms that I have done in the previous pages, I think I have the liberty to do so. So a force is required to change the state of inertia No, what state of inertia? Any of the three states it could be in. It could be in state of inertia of rest, inertia of motion, or inertia of direction. You want to change that, you require a force. That's what the first law in gist says. Okay, so I know we all as students from school learn that famous form, right? Body continues to stay in the state of rest or in motion until unless an external force acts on it. So I've reduced it to the idea of changing the state of inertia. Okay, so it makes it much more simpler. Okay, inertia of a body or a system, you could say, either in rest, either at rest or in uniform motion. Okay, so you want to complete the childhood statement, then either at rest or in uniform motion. So that white thing is just a addition to keep it similar to what you have learned in the past, but I think that yellow one is enough to describe the first law. Now, this is a qualitative law. You should understand most of the physics laws can be broadly classified into two types of laws. One is qualitative law, another is quantitative law. Qualitative laws are the ones where theory is proposed. There are no calculations. Whereas quantitative law means an experiment can be done, experimental result can be shown to the common man. Okay, so in a quantitative law, the results will come in some measurements, and there are some equations that you can throw in, and those equations can be quantitatively verified. Okay, so first law is not a quantitative one. There's no equation supporting first law, it's a theory. Whereas second law, I think you have those famous equations of F equal to ma and etc, where it's called a quantitative law. Okay, any future topic of physics also, you'll always look at a law introduced to you, whether it is Faraday's law, right? And there are many other laws. You have to Lenz's law. You have to ask yourself, is this a qualitative law or a quantitative law? Okay, so Newton's first law is a qualitative law. It is a qualitative law. What does this law talk about? This law just describes the need, doesn't calculate it. Please understand. Describes the need for force, describes the need for force to get a system out of laziness, or I should say inertia. Out of inertia. Right? And since it describes that need, so it is also called, as I already stated at the start, now I've given you a reason why it is called. It is also called law of inertia. Okay. Right. There is another name that is formulated. It is also called, I think some of you might be knowing it, law of equilibrium. So if someone says which of the three laws is called law of equilibrium, that's again first law. As it is used to test in any experiment, you want to test this law, you have to make the conditions on the body force is equal to zero conditions and then test it. So test F net is equal to zero. If net force vector on a particular system is zero, for a body to stay in to be in equilibrium. So equilibrium testing will also be done under this particular law. That's why this law is also known as law of equilibrium. And the last but not the least, from which we'll continue to the next topic, is this law introduces us to a frame of reference. From here onwards, that frame of reference, it's a big word, no? So I'll use FOR, okay? So in quotation. So frame of reference called inertial frame. So which of the three laws describes inertial frame or describes the concept of inertia? You should answer it as the first law, okay? So the last thing, this law introduces us to the concept of frame of reference. Frame of reference. And hereafter, we'll try to call it as FOR. Okay, I know I have to put quotations, otherwise it would be confused as fur or something like that. So FOR, and called inertial frame. So which frames are most important for the laws to work? We'll call it as inertial frames. And then at the end of the topic, we'll also define non-inertial frames and how the laws fail in that particular frame of reference. Okay. Right. Let's move on. So in a lab, any particular law, if you understand, once you say the word law, one of the prime things that a student of maths or physics should understand is what's the basic difference between the word law and theorem. Okay, so law is something where you don't have a written proof, but you will accept it under experimental results. So if someone says Pythagoras theorem, you don't need to go to a lab to test it. You can sit on a desk, have a pen and paper in hand, write a hypothesis for that theorem, and using some already known considerations and calculations, you can derive the answer on a piece of paper. That means there is a written proof for Pythagoras theorem. Okay, whereas a law doesn't have a written proof. You can't ask someone to prove F is equal to ma on piece of paper. Instead, you do an experiment and then calculate F on left hand side using experimental values, M and A using some measurements, and then prove using the experimental result that F is equal to ma. Anything which is proven by experiment is called a law. Okay, right? So how do people test Newton's first law? Okay, right? So this is how they do it. Steps 2, check if a frame. So this is how Newton suggested people to check. Okay, so inertial or non-inertial. So there are 3 basic steps. You'll all see them to be coming out very simple. But since this is a formal class, we are taking down all the things down. Okay. So step 1, keep an object at rest in a given frame of reference. Whatever frame of reference you want to test whether it is inertial or non-inertial, in that frame of reference, keep it at rest. And if F net on that body is equal to a null vector observed, you observed it, then go to step 2. So you have finished step 1. You need to keep it and observe till the net force is 0. If net force is not 0, then you have to apply some more forces in order to ensure that net force becomes 0. Okay, so after you are satisfied that net force has become 0, then go to step 2. Let's see what step 2 is. Move the object with constant velocity, right? If the F net is still this 0, then go to step 3. Now what he's asking is move the body with constant velocity. And if F net comes out to be still 0, observed obviously, I'll write still there. So that would be better English, right? And still you observe F net is 0, then go to step 3. Why is this important? Because it might be possible that the force that is acting is not showing up in one dimension, but in other direction it is acting. And when you try to move it with constant velocity, that force which is perpendicular to the velocity can start curving the body. So you have to ensure that forces are not acting in the direction perpendicular to motion. That's why step 2 is very important. So in step 1, you check whether the body stays at rest or not. And in step 2, you could see you are trying to actually check the inertia of motion concept. Okay, so that's very, very important step. And step 3 is kind of a tedious job. He says repeat step 1 and step 2 in all points. So you might have tested this and this at one point in the frame of reference. Just repeat all of these in the frames of reference points, and then you should be satisfied that entire frame is the inertial frame. Okay, right. So I know this looks very, very childish, but most of the physics philosophies at the start would be looking like childish. And you'd understand that if someone gives you a frame of reference and says, okay, this is an inertial frame, so he has done all that job of checking every points on this particular frame is inertial frame, and therefore you should be able to use Newton's laws in that particular frame. Okay, so check step 1 and step 2 at every point in given, again quotations, frame of reference. And if this also holds, then the given frame is inertial. Even if it fails at some places later, then you can't talk about it as an inertial frame. Okay, right. And another important note at the end of the thing, which you can easily observe for yourself, is consider an object moving with an acceleration let's say a bar, as seen from moving with an acceleration a bar from a frame of reference. Let's say capital A is the name of that frame of reference. Okay, right. Then two important points: acceleration of the object is the same in all frames of reference, which have no relative acceleration, with respect to A. So this is first important observation. This is going to be very simple concept later on, but initially when they wrote all these laws, right? So this is a very important point. That means if I have a frame A from which you saw the acceleration is a bar, and there is a frame B which has no relative acceleration with respect to A, then this acceleration can be borrowed into that frame also. A very simple thing. I'm writing the entire statement in a formal manner, but it's initially written in this particular law of first law. Okay, so the second important point, this is going to be a conclusion from the first one. Therefore, if capital A is an inertial frame, then so is capital B. Let's label that capital B as one of the frames, so which have no relatives. I'm saying, let's say there is a capital B frame which is not having any relative acceleration, and this is how they will avoid the steps. Listen carefully to this. You might think this is all a bit tedious, but you should understand the importance of this. Do you understand that this is very difficult steps to check every time a new problem is given? Every time a new problem is given, checking before applying Newton's laws, all these three steps would be very, very difficult. So what they do instead is they will have one frame always checked and accepted, right? Let's call that as capital A. And next time you're doing a problem in a different frame called B, as long as this B has no relative acceleration to A, and if A is already inertial, then they have proven B is inertial. So that means every new frame, you need not always use these steps to check whether it is inertial or not. Okay, so this boils down to an idea that we have to define one particular frame for all our laboratory experiments. Once you are sure that particular frame is inertial frame, then any other frame which is not having any relative acceleration with respect to that original, can I call it as base frame? You're using that as a base for all our experiments. So with respect to that base frame, then I'm sure, okay, fine, in that particular experiment, I'll get all my results in a perfect manner. Okay, so let's try to understand what that base frame is going to be taken as. And you all should have guessed it by now. That's going to be Earth. Okay, so let's not put a star. We'll go back to the previous page. So from here, the third important point is usually Earth is considered to be inertial for most of our experiments. But there is some problem with it. This result is not going to be true if you actually consider the reality. Okay, so in reality, so if the scale of the experiment is larger, right, it's not, let's say, the lab only that you're considering, but you're sending a spaceship to space to visit certain planet and give us the data, then maybe Earth's inertial nature is wrong, right? And because Earth actually orbits around Sun and it's spinning around its own axis and it's not even a perfect sphere. These are the three reasons why you should not consider Earth as a inertial frame if scale of the experiment is large. Okay, right. In reality, Earth orbits around the Sun, spins around its own axis, and is not a perfect sphere. Thus, Earth actually is not inertial, but for small scale experiments, it is considered inertial. Okay, right. So if someone in the future asks you, is Earth inertial? Let's say this is just a direct question to you, is Earth inertial? Answer is no. Then if he insists, oh, no, I want to do an experiment, right? So can you consider it again? Then you'll ask him back, what is the scale of your experiment? If the scale is throwing a particle up in front of your house to a height of the first floor, then it's fine. Earth is inertial. But you want to throw a particle into space and visit Jupiter or some other planet, and answer is it's no. So as a single question without any conditions, Earth is non-inertial. That's the final thing that we need to note. But for most of our calculations in a small scale, we will consider Earth to be an inertial frame of reference. So, actually not inertial. Okay, so that finishes our qualitative law. That's why you see no equations were written. All considerations, assumptions, descriptions, definitions are part of your first law. Okay, so it defined a lot of things. You should understand it's a very, very important law. Without doing this, directly jumping into F equal to ma is actually a not correct way of learning the topic. And that's why, even though it's painful, you could see we have written all the things that are important for the movement of this chapter into the second law. And that's what we're going to do.
గ్లాస్ ఏం చదువుతావు అంటే గ్లాస్ లేదు దీనికి 50 రూపాయలు అంటది 150 గ్లాస్ కాదంట మీకైతే 100 తీసుకుంటారు మాకైతే 50 తీసుకుంటారు.
Okay, so we'll start off with Newton's second law now. Okay, so because this is going to be a quantitative law, we need some physical quantities to be defined, and then those physical quantities become part and parcel of some equations which we will test using experimental results. Okay, so before we do that, therefore the first important quantity that we have to define in this topic is momentum, because it will be part of our statement. Okay, so we can't directly give the statement before defining it. Okay, so let's define. This is the symbol I'm going to use. It's a vector. So momentum vector in Newtonian mechanics. Please understand the definition will change once we move to the quantum mechanics. So in Newtonian mechanics, and that for a translating rigid body, rotations are not involved. So translating a rigid body. What is a translating rigid body? Each and every point of that body should have same velocity. And in that scenario, the value of that p bar is considered to be mass of the body into velocity of every point. So now there's no need to describe which point's velocity is. Every point is moving with the same velocity. So what's the caution for future? The caution is this: when not to use also, we need to note it down. In the future segment about modern physics, momentum is considered to be much more fundamental than mass. The reason is students of Newtonian mechanics might look at this as, m was defined as a more fundamental quantity, and using m we are deriving p, right? So it looks like momentum is a derived quantity, m is fundamental, and all of that would change once we go to the modern physics or quantum mechanics. So we need to just make a note of that so that we don't lose the sight of that fact. In the future segment, about modern physics, or in future segment of modern physics, p bar is considered to be a much more fundamental quantity than mass itself. To be more fundamental than m, mass itself. Okay, right, and we just continue that caution. Even light, and in future we consider light to be collection of photons. Therefore a photon whose rest mass, value of rest mass, m naught, I said, no, that is considered to be zero. If someone asks you what is the rest mass of photon, in future you would say it is zero. And if you believe mass is zero, therefore I'll substitute here, then the momentum of photon comes out to be zero. That means this equation itself is wrong, because we will do experimental results and we end up getting that light actually and photon actually possesses momentum even without possessing the mass. So that's why this law is not applicable in that chapter. Okay, so we'd consider light possesses and carries and imparts. These are the three important words. Okay, so it carries momentum from one place to another place, and if it hits a wall, right, it imparts that momentum to that wall. People have experimentally proven using lasers, by impinging lasers on objects, those objects could be moved. One of the basic ways of doing your LASIK operation, where lasers would be put inside your eye and they will be moving those rods and cones. Okay, so if those photons did not carry momentum, that operation itself is not valid. So since experimentally that result is proven, you have to consider that. Okay, so impart momentum, hence we can't use P is equal to mv equation to describe momentum in that chapter. So whatever we are doing is restricted to Newtonian mechanics. This one is only restricted to Newtonian mechanics. So once the caution is away, within the chapter's confines, let's take up the statement of the Newton's second law. So this is your statement now. So since this is a quantitative statement, so you'll have an equation here. Force F bar acting on a system, acting on a rigid body system, is equal to rate of change of its momentum, P bar. And since this is a vector, right, and no definition of a vector is complete until unless you talk about its direction also. So you're talking about the magnitude here and acts in the direction of, does it act in the direction of momentum or direct change of that momentum? It acts in the direction of rate of change. So F is directly related to not P bar but dP bar, right? So we'll write rate of change as dP bar by dt. So F bar is parallel to dP bar. Okay, so in statement form, it is going to act in the direction of that change. So this is a very important line here. It acts in the direction of that change. Math equation wise, we're just stating that F bar is equal to dP bar by dt. This is your equation. So just to give you an example, people did experiments to realize this. So it's not just given out of the blue. So because it's a law, we have done experiments. We are not going to do experiments because I'm sitting in front of a screen, you are watching a screen. So we'll take up the examples in a literal manner. Okay, so let's see some examples in which this can be seen. Example one, we'll go back to the vertically projected body systems. Okay, so you have floor from which a body was projected upward. Okay, after some time it reaches a position here, reaches somewhere here, and at that instant the momentum vector is in the upward direction, right? Momentum vector is in the upward direction, and using some speedometer or some measuring instrument, you know that P is going to reduce, body is going to go up, it goes to slow down, right? So what's the direction of your delta P bar here? So P next instant will reduce in its arrow. So final minus initial in that will be in the downward direction. So as it moves up during the upward motion, clearly dP is negative and dP bar is downward. Because it's negative, you said it is downward, which implies you have to believe that F bar on it acts downward. Right? Please understand, you don't see the force. Listen very carefully. You don't see the force. I don't see a string or something pulling it down. So by observing the change in P, you're able to visualize, acha, there is a force acting in the downward direction. So that's how they derive that gravity is downward or something like that. Okay, so we take it for granted over a period of used to it, but this is how at the start physicists why force is acting in the downward direction. Okay, right. And then we'll give it a reason from Newton's law of gravity and all that, that dP by dt in this problem is 0, which implies F acts down, and which further implies G is downward. You could see the G is downward is the final effect of motion. So this is the effect. That's why this is going to come in kinematics. So dynamics comes first, even though we don't study it first. Dynamics actually, the cause of motion comes first, and using the cause, believing the cause, we'll study the effect of motion in the kinematics chapter. So we already took this and did the calculation. So we are coming backwards. Actually, it's almost like a flashback chapter that we are doing in this week. Okay, so that's the example one. I can give you many more examples. Right, very quickly, let's take one by one. In example 2, let's illustrate what happens in a circular motion. So in any circular motion, if I take from one instant to next instant, let's say at this instant, the momentum vector is in this direction. At next instant, the momentum, let's say these two are very close to each other, you should understand. Okay, so it's moving in anti-clockwise sense. So this is pi vector and this is pf vector. Okay, with a dt time gap, let's say dt time gap. Okay, if magnitude of pf is equal to magnitude of pi, right, that means it's a uniform circular motion that you're looking at, but still there is a delta, even though the magnitudes are same. Delta p bar exists in this case, vectorially speaking. That means if you put these two vectors together here, let's say I draw them for vector addition. So this is your pf bar, and let's suppose this is something like a pi bar or something, because they are separated by a very small gap. I'm assuming this. Okay, I know I exaggerated it in that diagram. So this is your pi bar. You can see this line is parallel to this line. This slightly tilted one I have drawn here. Okay, right. So this is your pf bar. How do you draw the subtraction of pf bar minus pi bar? So the pf bar minus pi bar, can you see in which direction it exists? It comes this way. Okay, so the force you believe is acting parallel to this red vectors or this white vector. According to the Newton's second law, he says that the difference of P, which is the change in P, that is the direction in which force acts. So you bring this white color arrow and place it here and say, you have to believe that for this circular motion to take place, the force should be acting in the direction perpendicular to the momentum vector. So that's how we believe that there is a centripetal force that is required. Okay, so F bar should be acting towards the center. So this example comes under uniform circular motion. Okay, all right. That's your example 2. Okay, let's make the special case of this particular law now. Okay, special case of second law. Till now we have only looked at second law as rate of change of momentum. So what if the system's mass is constant, right? F bar is equal to d p bar by dt, and p is equal to, let's say, mv bar. We already know that, and therefore dmv bar by dt. All this is general case. Now here comes the special part. For the special case where m is constant of the system, so the rocket will not come under this condition, right? So when rocket is taken as system, its gases leave the system, right? So that's a variable mass. For that you can't write what I'm writing on the right. For rocket you have to modify this particular law. It's not valid. Okay, so as long as mass is constant, m comes out, and you can write this as dv bar by dt. And kinematics also already we have defined dv bar by dt as acceleration, so this would be ma bar. So for constant mass systems, F is equal to ma bar is the form of Newton's second law. That's famous. So you should understand this is not applicable always. It's only applicable when mass is constant. Okay. So special case of Newton's second law. Under what special case, you know that from the top. Okay, right. Last important thing in our terms and terminologies is some of the words that keep often repeating throughout our Newtonian physics, not just these 3 weeks, even when we go to thermodynamics chapter or even in electricity and magnetism, you would be getting these kind of words. So it's very important that at the start itself, we take the opportunity to clearly define these things so that we don't get any confusion later. Okay. All these things are done in your lower classes. So we'll write it under recall value. Okay. I'm not going to take any risk just in case you have missed these definitions. It's very important we recall them. So first important word that often repeats, and I've already used it in some of the places in the previous pages. So what's meant by the word system in any physics experiment? So a particle or a body or a collection of particles, a particle can be called a system, a body can be called a system, or a collection of particles or collection of bodies which are studied under Newton's laws is called a system. Okay, so this could be a body, simply a particle itself, or a body, or a collection of particles. You can even have collection of bodies together taken as a system. For which observation is done. Observation is done and laws of motion are applied. Laws of motion are applied. That is the definition for a system when I use the word system in physics. Next one. Obviously, the reverse word of system is the surrounding. So when you are studying a system under laws of motion, then there is something outside this system. We call it as surroundings. We'll just write it in a very simple shortcut manner. There is something called as universe. So the set of universe minus the set of system is called surroundings. Just wrote it in short form instead of writing big English statements. Okay. Another important word that keeps often repeating is external force on a system. Okay. Right. So let's see what this one is. Force on a part or whole of a system due to its interaction with a part or whole of the surroundings is called external force. See, English is a very tedious and very difficult language. Something very simple, if you make it into a statement, looks very tough. I think by now you would understand what is meant by external force. If a force acting on a system is due to the interaction with its surrounding, then it's called external force. So whatever I said means that. Okay, so I hope you understood. Right. So let me write it very quickly. Force on a part or whole of a system due to its, I'll write interaction. This is another word that we'll often see. Due to its interaction, again, with a part or whole of its surroundings, is called external force. So for example, the weight of you, right? Your weight right now, you're sitting in chair, I hope not standing and watching this. Your weight is a vector, okay, force vector. Is that an external force or internal force on you? If that is a question, then you should ask back, what is system? How do you define system? If I define you only as the system, then your weight is because of its your interaction with earth. So earth is a surrounding, then that force is called external force. But imagine someone else observes you with a system defined as you plus earth, both together taken, then on you the force that it will be acting is a part of the system, then in that case the weight would be a internal force. So whether a force is internal or external is basically defined by what is your system boundary. So in case one, the system boundary was you yourself, and in case two, the system boundary included Earth, then the force of interaction will become an internal force. And the word interaction is of two types. Okay, it's either a contact based interaction or a field based interaction. So right now you're sitting on chair. The chair versus you force is a contact based interaction, but whereas the force between Earth and Moon is a interaction based on the field. Okay, so that's the main understanding of a word interaction for this today's class. It will all change in tomorrow's class when I actually define fundamental nature of forces, or four fundamental forces of nature. In that you'll realize all forces are actually non-contact forces. Okay, last one for the day, internal force. I think force on a part of a system due to its interaction with another part of the same system. But by now you'll appreciate that definition. Okay, so force on a part of a system due to its, again, interaction, again inside that could be a contact based interaction or a field based interaction with another part of the same system. That's called an internal force. Okay, right. I'll just put the heading for tomorrow's class and then we'll continue from there in tomorrow. So tomorrow's first topic, which I think is already given to you as a reading assignment today. So please go through it. No need to wait for me to reach there. You can continue reading so that in the class I'll take the gist of that particular reading. Okay, so it will always help you to read more and more. Fundamental forces of nature. That's our next class. And then we'll try to define types of forces, right? Like tension, normal reaction, spring force, gravitational force, electromagnetic force. All those things we'll formally discuss, and then we'll start looking at problem solving techniques within this chapter. That's our agenda for tomorrow. So today's class would be slightly more informative, right? Students who like solving problems might have found today's class slightly boring, but it's a very important class in terms of answering any theoretical questions. And it is one of the few classes where later on you will not get an opportunity to realize what words you are using, what grammar you are using. If someone uses the word system in the future, you should track it back to the understanding that you had from this class. So it's like a foundation that we have laid in a very formal way. I did not assume any of the things were taught to you before. That's the reason why we had to write down everything. I would appreciate you also take down the notes in the same way, so that if you have any doubt in the future in any topic of mechanics, or further even in chemistry of thermodynamics, you should go back to this particular topic to understand what I said. Okay, so what are those four forces that we'll learn tomorrow, or you'll read today? One is the strong nuclear force, right? Next one is the weak nuclear force. So nuclear force itself, two types we have. Then we'll think the third one is electromagnetic force, and the last one is the gravitational force. So we'll say any force right now that we can classify them into one of these four forces. And by the way, the four that I have given are based on your NCERT textbook. The modern considerations actually club some of these forces together and say that there is one unified field theory. Not all of them, all four, they have not yet succeeded, but we are not going to take that up in our syllabus. Our syllabus considers these four as separate forces. Okay, so that's the idea, and we'll continue from here in the next class.